A whip and loud pop were all director Joel Souza heard before 42-year-old Halyna Hutchins collapsed to the ground. A newly released search warrant shows a crew boycott prompted a late start that day, the set breaking for lunch before assistant director Dave Halls handed Alec Baldwin what he believed was a cold or unloaded gun.
We were rehearsing and it went off and I ran out. We all ran out. They were butt doubled over, the AD and the camera woman and the director.
A witness telling detectives Joel had blood on him and Ms Hutchins couldn't feel her legs. Questions are now being raised about how a live round could have made it on set. The focus returning to Dave Halls and armourer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, both of whom had been accused of mishandling firearms before.
This AD that yelled at me at lunch because asking about revisions. He's supposed to check the guns. He's responsible for what happened.
Dangerous work standards, pace, too fast of pace, ignoring people when they say that they need a minute to do something safely.
Alec Baldwin himself vindicated by a camera operator saying the actor was very careful in an earlier scene, making sure a child wasn't near him when he fired. Attention now turning to whether real guns should be allowed on movie sets at all.
We have enough CGI. It's absurd. All of us are shaken to the core in the industry about this.
First thing you learn when you become a young Marine, you check a weapon. If someone tells you that weapon's clear, it's good, you could smack them in the face. So what a tragedy. Tragedy.
Brian W. Carpenter is an armourer who's worked on a variety of projects, including Queen of the South, and he joins us now. Brian, how on earth did this happen?
You know, a lot of that same question has been asked recently, and, you know, there's so many safety protocols in our industry professionally done that exactly this kind of situation should not have happened. There's no way that a live round should ever be introduced onto a movie set. So the variables and all of the safety protocol that would have to been broken, breached, or just otherwise completely ignored are pretty exhaustive.
Right. So can you give us a sense of what the process should have looked like?
So aside from, you know, renting the weapons from a reputable prop house and having them shipped in, they're under ATF regulation. That's a government agency that manages all of the firearms industry here in the United States. Aside from all of that, the guns would have been locked into a safe. They would have been cleared before they went into that safe, meaning they would have been checked for any rounds that would have been in them. And even at that point, there would be blank rounds that we're checking for. The idea of a live round being in it would just be, you know, one of those unheard of things. But nonetheless, the weapons would have been cleared then. When they're brought out of the props truck safe, they would have been checked a second time. Then they would have been loaded onto the cart or the bag, depending on how heavy the day was with firearms, and taken out to set. At that point in time, they'd have been brought out of the bag again, prepped and checked. And I'm not being exaggerating here. This is how many times we actually check these weapons before they get actually put into service on set. And then lastly, right before the scene occurs, after you have already, you know, understand what's going to be shot and you have everything ready, then you bring them out and they're double verified, checked at that point in time. You take a flashlight, you check for obstructions in the barrel, you look at the cylinder, make sure nothing's in the cylinder of this, in this case, a revolver, and it's verified by another person of authority on set. And those persons could be the director, the first AD, the key grip, the DP, and obviously any actors that are going to be using it. So depending on your relationship with the people you're working with, at least one other person has a double verification process. At that point in time, you hold on to the weapon until time for the scene to be shot, and then you load it at the last moment with blanks, hand it off, and declare it a hot weapon on set.
A prop master has come out today saying he turned down the role because it was an accident waiting to happen. Are these low-budget film sets known for cutting corners?
Unfortunately, yes. You know, a lot of my colleagues and I, we choose to work on the higher tier, like tier 2s or tier 3 shows, simply because of the fact when you get in down, and there's nothing wrong with an independent movie. We love them, we watch them, and they're fine. But if you're handling weapons on those lower tier movies, or you're having a lot of stunts or special effects, those are dangerous things to be operating in. And there are areas where budget can't be thought of in those areas because safety gets left behind when you do.
What you've described is a really complicated process, like a long process to make it safe. We've seen how tragic it is when it goes wrong. Should there even be real firearms used in films and television?
You know, in the film industry, unfortunately, there are injuries every year with stunts. For the most part, firearm safety has been extremely, well looked after over the course of, let's say, 25 years. 3 people have unfortunately lost their life, and no loss of life is acceptable. But for as many as movies have been made, the safety protocols, if they're followed, mitigate any risk or as much risk as possible. Having said that, I'm all for a safer way of doing things. If VFX gets to the point that it can, look as good as practical use of firearms, the things that we all like, the maybe if you guys watch, movies like Saving Private Ryan or Heat or any of the really visceral shows that they're using firearms to recreate historic events, it just can't be recreated as good or as well with visual effects at this point.
Brian, it's really good to speak to someone with your level of expertise on it. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys for having me.
I think naively I thought you could recreate it in this day and age with all the technology to have it sound and look and everything to be the same.
I mean, they could probably do it better than they could even a couple of years ago, but it's still, those movies you mentioned are really good examples of, when you see it firing.
That sort of stuff.
It's really, it's so tragic. I mean, I've been on sets where, the safety officers have been fully respected, even if it's like put on sunscreen. Like they do lots of different things. But there are times I know where there's pressure to move on and you're losing light.
There's always time pressure,
There's always time pressure. So,
and
hearing how many checks that they would normally go through.
Well, they missed a lot of those checks. I mean, obviously Alec Baldwin, from what we know, was not shown. And that's usually done out of etiquette and to make the actor feel safe and everybody around them feel safe.
It's hard not to think about it, isn't it? I've thought about this so much.
It's so tragic.
From every sort of angle.
No.